Good afternoon. We are gathered here today on Treaty 6 territory, and I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who share a very deep connection with this land. Today is the day we will hear the throne speech, and Albertans are looking for hope. They're looking for relief from the skyrocketing utility bills, insurance bills, and other monthly costs that the UCP has imposed on them. They're looking for a government that will create good-paying, sustainable jobs with an economic plan that recognizes that Alberta's future and addresses the very real challenges we face when it comes to finally making progress on diversifying the economy. They're looking for a government that actually supports young Albertans from kindergarten straight through to university graduation day. They're looking for a government that supports public, and I can't emphasize the word public enough, healthcare. Sadly, I believe that Albertans will be sorely disappointed. The Premier has already indicated he's going to make the largest move towards for-profit healthcare our province has ever seen. He's shown a complete disregard for post-secondary, cutting more than $600 million from schools since taking office. He's left our K-12 classrooms to fend for themselves during an unprecedented public health crisis. He's demonized teachers, cut hundreds of millions of dollars from classrooms, and imposed a curriculum that no one supports. The UCP's left small businesses high and dry and has offered no real support for innovators and entrepreneurs while focusing on what the UCP sees as the next big thing, coal, with no regard to its impact on our Rocky Mountains and our province's drinking water supply. Enough is enough. With that in mind today, I've invited 6 guests to the throne speech who have bared the brunt of UCP cuts, incompetence, and their constant failure to lead. If this government is going to continue to fail them with this week's throne speech and the budget, they're going to at least have to look these folks in the eyes and look into the eyes of the very Albertans they are hurting with their decisions. In a moment, you'll hear from Catherine Ann McGrath-Lee. Catherine lost her father, Vermilion resident Bill McGrath, during a 4th wave of COVID-19 that was entirely preventable had this government chosen to lead instead of pandering to extremists. You'll hear from Patricia Mosby, a teacher at Baldwin School. She's one of the many teachers who are abandoned and now being vilified by this government. And I'm sad to report that Patricia and her family now plan to leave Alberta this June as a direct result of the UCP's actions. You'll hear from Renee Hopf, a library and X-ray technologist, who's watched firsthand how the lack of support for public health care is impacting the next generation of frontline healthcare workers. She knows that the best path forward is to improve the care Albertans receive in the public system, not hollow out the public system. You'll hear from Christy Bateman, whose child is among so many who have struggled greatly due to the UCP decision to cut PUF funding. That programming, that PUF funding, is critical for students with learning disorders and disabilities, and despite so many people, including Christy, speaking out, the UCP continues to make vulnerable children suffer the most. Also joining us today is Tyson Boyd, owner and operator of the Starlight Room here in Edmonton. His venue and so many others have faced hardship during COVID-19 as the UCP consistently did the bare minimum to support small businesses and entertainment venues throughout the pandemic. The UCP announced public health measures with no notice and then delayed their support grants as countless businesses piled on mountains of debt, such that some have closed forever. And lastly, joining us today is Margaret Berry, who is among tens of thousands of Albertans who have spoken out against our Rocky Mountains and their UCP plans to mine coal in them. Margaret is among so many who are calling for a real economic plan for Albertans, not one that focuses on industries of the past. As many of you know, I will be reintroducing the Eastern Slopes Protection Act as the first private member's bill this session. This legislation would effectively ban coal mining in the Rocky Mountains this session, and I'll be pushing adamantly for it to be passed. These Albertans are joining us today to speak out against the policies, cuts, and incompetence of this government, but they are representative of so many more people who are struggling. This government promised them jobs. They signed a public health guarantee. They said they would build a curriculum in collaboration with Albertans. I could go on and on and on, but the fact of the matter is they have failed on all of these fronts. They put their political fortunes and drama and their focus on appeasing their friends first. Ultimately, those decisions have cost Catherine, Patricia, Christy, Renee, Tyson, and Margaret so much. Today, these Albertans, all Albertans, are looking for this government to step up, to do their jobs, and to finally lead. I'll now turn things over to Catherine to talk about her father.
My father, Bill McGrath from Vermilion, was a healthy, vibrant 89-year-old who was hunting antelope in Jenner on October 23rd, 2021, and passed away 5 days later after contracting COVID. Dad was double vaccinated and had stayed safe for so long, but he had vulnerable lungs. Our hearts broke as he became a casualty of Alberta's fully preventable fourth wave. Rather than protecting us, the UCP government declared we were going to have our best summer ever. And tragically, many Albertans, not just us, lost loved ones. In hospital, after consultation with ICU doctors, and with the clarity there would be little chance of survival, my father declined intubation, induced coma, and ICU, which meant death was imminent as his lungs failed. This decision, however, allowed his children to enter his room in full PPE and touch and talk and be together as a family for his final 3 days. This was one main criterion for his courageous decision. On the last afternoon of his life, Dad spent almost 2 hours dictating a letter for those who weren't practicing vigilant masking and who chose not to vaccinate. He wanted them to protect themselves, but also to do it for their families and their fellow Albertans. Dad had vulnerable lungs, and like so many Albertans who are more susceptible to COVID, he did everything he could to stay healthy. But when the UCP government had a chance to squash this virus, they let the wave come in that many of the vulnerable could not escape. Dad wanted to encourage everyone to vaccinate and avoid the kind of death he was experiencing. His compassion and his non-judgment of his fellow Albertans was reflected in his specific choice of words. I don't want people, upon hearing my story, to be afraid of getting vaccinated. Dad lived without judgment, fear, or anger, and he died as he lived. He gave us all so much in those last moments and offered a precious example to be so proud of. Learn to do by doing and teach by showing was one of his final comments, and will strive to live up to that 4-H-centered motto.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Imagine it's so difficult to be here today, but you know you are speaking out for so many others who've lost loved ones during this pandemic. Thank you. I'll now turn things over to teacher Patricia Mosby.
I have lived in Alberta all of my life, and I have proudly taught here for 10 years. I love my job. Even on the hardest of days, I love it. Unfortunately, it has come to the point where I can no longer live and work in a province where the government has no respect for teachers or for our students. These last 2 years have been the hardest that we will experience in our careers. Educators have consistently pivoted between in-person and online teaching with little to no warning, are doing more work on unpaid time, managing COVID protocols, battling curriculum that is developmentally inappropriate that we were not consulted on, comforting worries, navigating big feelings, holding the mental health of students in our hands, all while being expected to proceed like nothing has changed. Teachers have always worn multiple hats: educator, social worker, guardian, and now we've been expected to navigate COVID with minimal support that was grudgingly and unwillingly given by the government. We've had to show up for our students in a much bigger way, which we do every day, and we do it despite the underhanded attacks and degradation by the government. The government had a choice, and they chose to attack us. How dare you? Teachers understand the impact we have on children, and we do not take this job lightly. So despite knowing that the work I put in every day is completely disrespected and underappreciated by those who are supposed to be our leaders, I stand at the front of my class every day with a calm confidence and a smile on my face, because that's what my kids need from me. However, I constantly feel exhausted, anxious, angry, and my mental health is at an all-time low. I feel hopeless about the future of public education in Alberta. It is with this in mind that my family and I have decided to make the heart-wrenching decision to leave Alberta. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And I know Albertans stand behind our teachers, even if the government does not. Now, thank you for all the work that you've been doing. Now, Renee will talk to us about the dismantling of our public health care by the state.
My name is Renee Hopp, and I've been working in the healthcare field for the last 15 years, initially at various hospitals throughout Alberta and BC, and for the last decade teaching in post-secondary. I've witnessed my students enter into the healthcare field, enthusiastic, eager, and committed to ensuring that their patients receive the best possible care, to ensure that the dignity of their patients is preserved, and maybe even give them a bit of hope. Now I see these healthcare workers struggling in a context I never imagined: the dismantling of our healthcare system. There are patient loads that exceed the capacity of the individual. Imagine giving 110% and knowing that it is not enough because you are one person and your patient load has nearly doubled. A friend of mine who is a registered nurse recently left her job due to the overwhelming pressures that were placed on her and the impact that had on her mental health. Others are on the brink of leaving, desperately trying to care for their patients, while they themselves are completely depleted. Throughout the 2 years of this pandemic, when our healthcare workers are the ones that we need the most, our healthcare workers have been, the way they've been treated is reprehensible at best. They have been exploited for their most precious quality, and that is that they genuinely care about the well-being of their patients and want to stand beside them in their time of need, even if it is at the expense of their own physical and mental health. The lack of support and respect for healthcare workers and the resulting staff shortages have had huge impacts on patients that have been life-altering: delayed diagnosis, delayed treatment, loss of dignity, and death. What's going on right now in our healthcare system is catastrophic. Staffing shortages are not conducive to early diagnosis. Staffing shortages are not conducive to a sustainable healthcare system. Staffing shortages are not conducive to protecting the physical and mental health of our patients nor our healthcare workers. The Alberta government must do better.
Thank you so much, Renee. Public health care is so important, and may I add that staffing shortages cannot be fixed by privatizing the health care within which those staff would work and offering them less money in order to create profits, something that Jason Kenney somehow thinks is going to be the solution. Next, I'd like to turn things over to Christy to talk about the impact of education funding cuts on her child.
Our third and youngest child, Isabella, was born with a complex heart defect. By the age of 3, she had braved 3 open heart surgeries and 2 heart cath procedures. Isabella's challenges would extend outside the walls of the hospital. Shortly after her 2nd birthday, we noticed delays in her language and speech development. After several assessments, she was approved for program unit funding, or PUF, for her first year of preschool. Her speech development that year was truly remarkable. This brave little girl works hard, and with resources and support she received, we saw an explosion of language. Although she qualified for a 2nd year of PUF, the program had undergone dramatic changes. Initially, it was unclear if she would even qualify at all. In the end, we needed to cover the cost of 2 preschool classes to meet the classroom hours required for funding. She no longer had an education assistant to work with her in the classroom, and we had to advocate for weekly speech therapy. She is now in kindergarten, and despite her significant speech delays, she has 0 classroom support. We are fortunate to have the financial means to seek help privately, something many families are not able to do. The daily work we do at home or the visits from the speech therapist are not a substitute for services offered in the classroom. We are one of hundreds of families impacted by the UCP government's changes to PUF, not to mention the impacts felt in the classrooms and by educators. As any parent knows, our child's learning is exponential in the early years. This is also true for those with delays and disabilities. We have an amazing opportunity to help children catch up with their peers and transition into an inclusive environment if given the proper early interventions. It is abundantly clear that families like mine are not included in this government's plans. I would argue that the littlest Albertans are our greatest resource. Investment in our children, in all children of this province, is not frivolous. It is a wise investment in our future.
Well, thank you very much, Christy, for telling us your story. And of course, you are literally, your family is one of thousands and thousands of families who have spoken out about the damaging impact of these cuts on their children's education and their children's future. And it really is quite overwhelming to me that that is the place where this government considers is a good place to start when it comes to cutting. Hopefully the government will listen and to hopefully do the right things to give children like Isabella and her classmates the kind of support that they need to succeed and prepare for the future. So also Tyson and Margaret, thank you too. For attending today. Tyson, our small business owner, and Margaret are a very effective community activist who's been educating Albertans about the dangers of coal development in the Rocky Mountains. Thanks to all of you. Albertans see themselves in you and in your words, and they appreciate your courage in standing out here today. With that, any of us here are happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Just a reminder for those on the phone to use the *9 function. If you're on Zoom, to raise hand function to get in the question queue. Once your mic is open, please state your name, outlet, and who you'd like to direct your question to. We'll do one more pass for questions. Just a reminder, *9 if you're on the phone, raise hand if you're on Zoom. Seeing no questions, that's our press conference for today. Thank you.
Tens of thousands of Albertans have already provided their idea for how we can build Alberta's future. You can too by going to albertasfuture.ca.